Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Synergies tier list video. Today our analysts will be ranking each synergy from S all the way down to the C tier for patch 11.16. We'll be taking a look at which synergies are doing the best and which are struggling in the current meta. There is a B patch targeting Hellions, but aside from that synergy, the overall meta should be the same. With that, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our tier list, we have the synergies in S tier, which consists of Hellion, Caretaker, Revenant, Ironclad, and Mystic. These traits are doing the best in the meta in terms of consistency. They're used often and are usually part of winning boards. At the top of the list, we have Hellions. Somehow Hellions continue to thrive even after multiple nerfs. Of course, the synergy is being carried by Tristana, but both Lulu and Kennen are right behind her in terms of dominance. Now, it is worth noting that these champions are being nerfed in the B patch, so Hellion may fall down in priority after that. But also, let's be real for a moment. How many times have they nerfed Tristana and she's still relevant? So even with additional nerfs, we're going to play it safe and say they're still going to do well. Caretaker, or Heimerdinger, is the best late game carry. His ability does so much damage to most of the enemy board, though it does troll sometimes depending on positioning. But no other champion and trait brings as much value to the late game as Heimerdinger does. So if you have AP items, we recommend transitioning to Heimer in the late game. Once again, Revenants are in the S tier because they're just too darn good as frontliners. Ivern and Volibear bring a lot of CC, while Fiddlesticks adds a lot of extra damage and heals, soaking up even more damage. Nocturne, while not a frontliner, is also doing well in the meta with assassins. All in all, this is one of the best mid to late game synergies that practically every board can utilize. And as usual, the last two synergies are Ironclad and Mystic. These two splash traits bring too much value to be anything less than S tier. Sure, you won't always have both in every game, but the fact that you can put 2 or 3 of either to counter the current lobby you're in is crazy good. Every game you should be looking to see which of these two synergies you need, and then adding the relevant champions you can. Let's now move on to the A tier. This tier consists of Assassin, Abomination, Legionnaire, Nightbringer, Sentinel, Brawler, Cavalier, Ranger, and Cruel. These traits are used frequently in the meta, and though they may not be quite as strong as the S tier traits, they're still some of the best. At the top of the list, we have Assassin. Assassins are doing quite well thanks to the changes to Nocturne. Nocturne can struggle into other top meta compositions, but on average, he's one of the better carries, especially with best-in-slot items and Revenant to back him up. Diana is also another reason for the success of Assassins, as she's so much better after the mid-set buffs that they did to her. Viego is also still doing just fine in the late game, so overall, Assassins are in a great place. Abomination is still doing well even though it's been continually nerfed or changed. The fact is, the monstrosity is great at buying time for backline carries like Vel'Koz or Heimerdinger. With tank items, it's even harder to kill. If you're looking for a reliable synergy to play, Abomination is the way to go. Ah, Legionnaire. The adjustments they made to this trait have been fantastic. Changing to heal on every auto and ability cast makes it a lot more consistent, raising its overall value with champions like Yasuo, Riven, and even Draven or Kayle. Definitely one of the better reworks that they've had, especially with how much it has increased the value of Legionnaire in the meta. We can't mention Legionnaire without Nightbringer, as those two synergies often go hand in hand thanks to Yasuo. But Nightbringer isn't entirely based around Yasuo, as there's plenty of other strong champions. Diana, as we mentioned, is doing really well. Lee Sin is one of the best early to mid game frontliners. Aphelios isn't amazing, but is at least playable as a backliner. All in all, Nightbringer is in a great spot. Honestly, we're not sure if Sentinel should be this high on the list. Yes, they're still one of the best opening synergies you can have with Aurelia and Olaf. They don't have a great mid-game now that Lucian is out of the meta. That said, Akshan is one of the best late-game carries, so Sentinel goes up in value at that point because of him. So for now, thanks to the early game and Akshan, Sentinel remains this high on the list. Brawlers are still brawlers. Fantastic early game with Nunu carrying the mid-game. Late game Volibear is a beast, though it's rare to actually use Brawler with him. But since the synergy is all about early game dominance, we're happy to keep it in the A tier. Cavaliers have lost a bit of value in the meta, with Hecarim falling out of favor and nerfs to Sejuani. But let's be honest, Rel is still insanely good, and she alone can carry this synergy to the top. Rangers are in a strange place right now. Aphelios can carry, but he has so many requirements to do well. The true carry for Rangers is actually Akshan. Akshan 2 is the best late game AD carry by far, outperforming champions like Aphelios, Draven, or even Tristana 3. With good items, he can 1v9. Certainly not the easiest to play since he's a 5 cost, but utilizing Aphelios in the mid game to transition into Akshan is why Rangers are actually viable in the meta. And lastly, for the A tier, we have Cruel. Not that much has really changed for Teemo. If you can 2-star him safely, great, he's going to do quite well for your board. But anyone too low on health can't make use of him since he costs far too much health to upgrade when you're close to losing. The best part of Cruel is that it finally works with the Hellion trait, so you can actually get value from Teemo being the last one alive. Let's move on to the B tier. This tier consists of Invoker, Skirmisher, Forgotten, Inanimate, Victorious, Redeemed, Dawnbringer, and Cannoneer. These are slightly weaker traits than A tier, but still have a place in the meta. First up is Invoker. Invoker is a great endgame synergy to splash in for quite a few compositions, most notably when a board is running AP champions like Heimerdinger or Vel'Koz. But even champions like Aphelios can utilize the bonus mana generation. The main issue holding back Invoker is that you really only see 2 Invokers splashed in. 4 Invoker hasn't been seen much since the mid-set came out, especially with the state that Karma's in. Overall, it's a useful splash synergy, it just has limited options. Skirmishers are in an interesting place. Early game, amazing. Mid game, a bit weaker, but Nidalee carry or an early Jax will do well. Late game, well, they don't really have a late game. Problem is that Jax does great in stage 4 and 5, then falls off hard when other players have upgraded their 4 and 5 cost champions. There's a lot going well for Skirmishers, but until they have a solid way to scale in the late game, they're going to continue to be slightly below average. Next, we have Forgotten. With the Hecarim build falling out of the meta, so is Forgotten. Of course, Draven is still a champion that you can play, but his presence in the meta is far lower than other 4-cost carries. The Legionnaire change did help him, but Draven lacks a bit of damage against all the frontline this set has. Being a front-to-back champion hurts him a lot in the meta since plenty of other carries can hit backline. Vel'Koz, Heimerdinger, Akshan, Tristana, and even Aphelios all have options to do damage past the frontline. But Draven just sits there hitting them, and it's not like he's doing an insanely high amount of damage like a melee carry. So with Hecarim out of the picture and Draven being a mid-tier at best, Forgotten isn't in a great spot. On to Inanimate. Look, Gwen is a great champion, especially because adding her to your board for Mystic is often easier to do in the late game. Inanimate is a decent trait, but it can feel a bit lacking because of how short the duration is. The damage reduction effect is never useless, but only lasting 8 seconds does mean Inanimate can be a bit situational. At times it's quite effective, other times it's really not. Honestly, with just a small buff, this trait would go from alright to really good. Victorious hasn't really had a time to shine in the meta. Garen just hasn't had the same influence in games that he had prior to the mid-set. Part of that is due to Karma not being viable in the meta, but also Garen is just outclassed by other frontliners like Revenant and Ironclad. Garen can certainly do well, but finding room for him on your board can be difficult. Overall, not the worst trait, but we haven't really seen it do all that much as of yet. Redeemed is a trait that's all over the place. Sometimes 6 Redeemed is great. Other times it's 3. Most often it's just the Redeemed champions themselves being utilized. Since there's a lack of consistency with Redeemed, it is sadly down here in the B tier, but it's the type of synergy that goes up and down in value quite often. Another vertical trait struggling to find a place in the meta is Dawnbringer. Dawnbringer also has issues where at times it's doing well, particularly with Riven and Nidalee as carries, and other times you rarely see it used at all. The main issue is Karma. Karma was the linchpin that held Dawnbringer together when vertical traits took over the meta. With her not being viable, it leaves Riven and Nidalee as the main carries. Both are strong, but often don't rely on Dawnbringer, so Dawnbringer loses value in the meta. Once Karma is back to doing well, likely after a buff, expect to see Dawnbringer stock go up. And lastly, for the B tier, we have Cannoneer. It may be weird seeing this so low considering how well Tristana is doing, but Cannoneer is really only relevant because of Tristana. Lucian took a dive out of the meta after the nerfs he received in 11-16, in addition to 2 Cannoneer being nerfed. So this trait is riding on the back of Tristana and nothing else. Now we move on to the last tier, C tier. This tier consists of Draconic, Knight, Spellweaver, and Renewer. These synergies in C tier are not unplayable, but they are heavily situational or don't provide as much value as traits in the other tiers. At the top of the C tier, we have Draconic. Draconic is a tough synergy to place on a tier list because it goes up and down in value so often. A lot of the value is also being tied to RNG. By that we mean there's a lot of inherent luck involved in Draconic. How early are you able to find Draconic? What type of eggs are dropping? What's in the eggs? Finding early 5 Draconic is also quite the high roll. For each of those questions, there's multiple outcomes. Some games you're just not going to find Draconic early enough in the game for it to matter. Other games you're going to hit it by 2-1. Even when hitting it, maybe the eggs that are dropping are only small ones, so you don't even get that much value from them. That's why we're playing it safe with Draconic down in the C tier. It's not valued enough in the meta right now to warrant being higher, considering how volatile the trait can be. Draconic can be amazing, but it can also be quite disappointing. Next up, we have Knight. Knights are, to be blunt, the worst frontline option in the current meta. Revenants, Cavalier, Brawlers, Ironclad, there's just so many better options throughout the whole game. Of course, you're not unable to play Knights, but you're rarely going to want more than 2 on your board. Quite a few of the champions are good though, such as Thrash, Nautilus, and Galio. But the trait itself has a diminished presence in the meta. Spellweaver has a few issues. First off, it doesn't provide enough to be useful, particularly to Spellweaver. 4 can actually pack quite the punch, but it's not common to ever find yourself in a position where you're able to play 4 Spellweaver. Another issue is that Vel'Koz, the main carry for Spellweavers, doesn't need the trait to do well. Redeemed and good items are plenty for the squid to do well, with Spellweaver being only used by happenstance. We're not saying to completely avoid Spellweaver. It's going to be an active trait for compositions like Abomination with Zyra or Vel'Koz carry. The point is, even when active, Spellweaver isn't providing nearly as much value as practically every other synergy. Speaking of synergies that are lacking in value, our final trait for the tier list is Renewer. The main issue with Renewer is similar to Spellweaver. 4 Renewers can be quite good, but 2 Renewers is, well, barely noticeable. Sure provides some mana regen for champions like Heimerdinger that can sit in the back, but it's such a small amount. If Renewer had access to more champions, meaning you could put in 4 Renewer more often, it would likely rise in value. But for now, with 2 Renewers being the most common, this trait is likely to stay at the bottom of the tier list. That's all we have for today's tier list video. Overall, the meta is still in a good spot, though there are a few outliers, one of which, Hellions, is being addressed in the B patch. Let us know what you think about the current meta in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.